The 8th commandment, you shall not steal. Do you know what that insinuates if I say you shall not steal? It insinuates that every man and woman is entitled to his or her own property. It means what they have is theirs. And you know what is embedded in that 8th commandment? The concept of free enterprise. So what that means is if a man has a piece of property and he's going to use that property to make money, no man ought to take that from him. No one. No man ought to take that from him. Whether it's his neighbor at gunpoint or whether it's the province of Ontario at gunpoint. There's an ancient story in the Bible about a king who was corrupt. He was a tyrant, kind of like Ford. And his name was Ahab. And Ahab saw a vineyard that he liked. And the vineyard was owned by a man named Naboth. Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard. Naboth wouldn't give it to him. And so you know what Ahab did? Stole it. And God destroyed him for it. Property theft. The shutting down of free enterprise is a stench in the nostrils of God. It's a stench in the nostrils of God. And this is what we're seeing. All these restaurants that are closing, all these businesses that have been forced to shut down, all of these people that have poured their livelihoods and mortgaged their homes to have restaurants and businesses and prosper and live a dream. All of these people, the government of Ontario has stolen from every one of them. They're guilty of property theft, destroying lives.
Armor of Truth.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Brad from Carolina YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.
All right. Welcome everybody to the show. It's Armor of Truth Live number 144. That rhymes a little bit anyway. Thank you for being here, folks. Here we are. We're back. We've been on hiatus for, a week or so. It's great to be back in the saddle with you today. Let's jump right into this poll question today. All right. Who will be the next president of the United States? What do you think? Now, I went out and got some polls, looked at some polls, see who the actual candidates that are actually, are there other Republican candidates? Well, it's just, are there any Democratic candidates? You have an incumbent, a president there, so usually you don't see many Democratic, you wouldn't see people running for office from the same party as the incumbent. But this year we're not in normal times. So here's the question, folks. Who will be the next president of the United States? So far, I put this out a bit ago, and let's get as many votes as we can in here. The link to this poll question is pinned to the top of the live chat, or you can navigate to the community section on this YouTube channel, the Brad from Carolina YouTube channel. So far, out of about 100 folks, we got 60 folks, or 61% are saying Donald Trump will return in 2024. Now, we're not asking you, do you think the system is rigged, or do you think who will be the next president? I'm not even using the word elected because I don't have much faith in that anymore. Not right now, anyway. Interesting, though, that 61% say Donald Trump will return. 13% say it's going to be Biden for 4 more years. 2% for Ted Cruz. About 10% for Ron DeSantis, although it doesn't look like he's actually all that interested in running. He's got a state to manage, a wife who is ill. He's got probably better things to do than to get involved in the circus that is federal politics. And of course, Oprah Winfrey coming in at a close third place, 15%. I didn't throw that in there as a joke. That's serious. That's you can't count Oprah out. We'll come back and check on this poll question a little later. Go over there and vote in the poll. We'll see what you guys think about this as we move forward today. Welcome. It's good to see you. We've got a great show for you today. This one is packed full. I don't know how long we're going to be here, but I'm going to try to move through things at a nice pace. Not going to hem-haw around. We're going to dive right in. The opening that I showed you there, the video that we opened with Pastor Jacob Raume. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Raume. Who we've discovered recently, one of those Canadian pastors whose church was shut down. He didn't shut it down. I mean, they did for a short period of time, but the authorities came in and shut his church down. One of those pastors who's speaking boldly in a time when we need leaders, men of God, to speak boldly. The government is not absolute. So you can see right here at armoroftruth.net, you can see in the Culture Vault, this will be the featured article at the top of the page right now, we've got the video where, so go ahead and check this out. You might want to wait till after we're finished here with this show. All right, but anyway, check this out. This is the link to the video. When you go into this post, it's a video from Tony Costa, Dr. Tony Costa, Toronto Apologetics. It is Tony Costa sitting with James Coates, Tim Stevens, both of those men, pastors who were imprisoned for keeping their churches open. And of course, we mentioned there Jacob Raume. And you'll be hearing more from him on this channel for sure. And I hope that you'll check him out on YouTube. Trinity Bible Chapel. Check them out. So that's who you heard at the open today, our little cold opening. Let's go ahead and remind you while we're over here at armoroftruth.net, if you'd like a free Bible, please email us. We're shipping some of these out tomorrow, some of the requests. If you've requested one recently, we're going to take care of that in the next day or two. Email us at hello@armoroftruth.net and just in the subject line say, I want a Bible, and we'll send you a Bible and a starter pack of tracts at our expense. We love to do it. Email us at hello@armoroftruth.net if you'd like a free Bible and some tracts, or if you want to reach out to us and tell us what you're seeing where you live. Do you have questions? Do you have things you want to report about what you're seeing with local governments flexing their tyrannical muscles? Let us know what you think. You can contact us at hello@armoroftruth.net. You can also reach us old school. Armor of Truth, P.O. Box 729, Hudson, North Carolina 28638. If you'd like to support us, folks, we need your help to get funded for next year. Links in the description of this video to help you with that. You can also navigate to armoroftruth.net/donate. All right. Now that that's out of the way, let's get down to it. November 3rd, which is tomorrow, unless you're in Australia, it's already November 3rd. But this is something interesting here. What do we have? Nationwide walkout for the children, it says here. This is from Guardians of Medical Choice. Now, we're not trying to endorse or get behind anything like that. I just want to let you know this is something that's happening, and I haven't studied, had time to look into the organization deeply. This is just a story that we're covering for you. So on November 3rd, Children's Health Defense will join organizations and individuals by kicking off a worldwide walkout of work by calling in sick or taking a personal day to gather in protest of the unprecedented loss of freedom that has occurred all over the world since you know what happened. Parents will also be pulling their children out of school for the day in protest of the many restraints that have been applied directly to children. All right, so a lot of this stuff I can't even read here for you on YouTube, so you can navigate to guardiansofmedicalchoice.com. I had so many links to share with you today in the description. Some of these I just don't have the room to share. So I wanted to share that with you. Tomorrow, November 3rd, check it out. See what's going on in your area. Check the website and find out if it's possible to organize some people in your area. If you're in the live chat right now and you are planning to do this, let the folks know. All right, also, Sunday, 2 days ago, was Reformation Day. Halloween. The day Martin Luther was said to have nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg church in protest of the way the Mother Church had gone. And so in honor of that, I want to share with you a little bit about what has the Reformation given us that we can use today. Let me start off with a little introduction for our show today, and then I'll give you this piece about nature and grace. Something that you can take with you to think about what has the Reformation done for us that we can use today. Reformation being a response to the Middle Ages, the corruption of the Middle Ages. But let's talk about today for a moment. The principle of non-contradiction, or saying that we can know anything, or that we can know something about reality, that the truth will not contain contradictory notions or statements, has been evicted from the public square. So we're going to be talking about the media war machine today. But it's so obvious at this moment in history that respectful discourse and debate about science have been overwhelmed by the screeching sounds of a generation that has no perspective beyond its inner desires and unstable emotions. Behind the facade of this raw nerve generation stands the worldview that makes all of this possible. The worldview that makes the madness of lockdowns and mandates and cancel culture possible. It is the undead corpse of postmodernism driven by an insatiable hunger for control, or, as we pointed out here many times, positivism. This has brought the world to the brink of societal, economical, rational collapse. Weak-minded subjectivity is feeding the beast of the scientific dictatorship. And that's what we mean by positivism. Philosophical ideology, a theory. Worldview matters. Worldview most certainly matters. The result of decades of compulsory public education as informed by arbitrary, corrosive secularism has made it possible for a global elite to move the masses with relative ease. We've become spineless pushovers. And these symptoms are seen also in the modern church. As you saw earlier, Canadian pastor Jacob Raume said recently, How easy Nero would have had it shutting down the early Christian church if he had just told everyone that there's a pandemic. You can't go to church. You have to stay home. How easy it would have been, right? Along with the compulsory public education system, the media seems to be another very effective weapon of mind control and basic deception. And at this point, it's difficult to tell the difference between the corporate shills, disinformation agents, and the true believers of this modern movement of media masochism. The narratives are few right now. Possibly there's only two: those who are for and those who are against, with absolutely no middle ground allowed. That's black and white thinking. In America, we've been subjected to a decades-long process of demoralization that has led to this current destabilization. Once again, worldview matters. And the current prevailing worldview of human autonomy, man as sovereign, government as absolute, is, to reclaim a term that's been co-opted by the agents of Agenda 21, not sustainable. Not if freedom is still important to anybody out there. And so today, we're going to see some fresh examples of just how contradictory, misguided, and vicious these people in the media have become in their attempt to rule the minds of the masses, in the attempt to get their ideology out front and to keep it there, regardless of truth. All right, so let's go to class. Now I've got that word at the bottom is nature. I might have to go ahead and go full screen on you for a minute. We're talking about what has the Reformation given us. What the Reformation tells us is that God has spoken in the Scriptures concerning both the upstairs, where grace is, and the downstairs, where nature is. He spoke in a true revelation concerning himself, heavenly things, and he spoke in a true revelation concerning nature, the cosmos, and man. Therefore, the Reformers had a real unity of knowledge. They simply did not have the Renaissance problem of nature and grace being separate. They had a real unity. Not because they were clever, but because they had a unity on the basis of what God had revealed in both areas. In contrast to the humanism which had been set free by Thomas Aquinas and the Roman Catholic form of humanism, there was for the Reformation no autonomous portion. We'll define for you a little bit more about what we mean about autonomy as we go forward here. True freedom within, through art and science. Art and science have freedom. And they're not autonomous. They are informed by grace. Whenever art or science has tried to be autonomous, a certain principle has always manifested itself, and that is that nature eats up grace. Now, this is according to Francis Schaeffer. This is his diagram that I'm sharing with you today. This is what happens inevitably, and we're seeing it in spades today in our culture. Nature eats up grace whenever art or science tries to be autonomous, absolute. And thus art and science become themselves meaningless. The Reformation had some tremendous results and made possible the culture which many of us grew up in and came to love. The Reformation confronts us with an Adam who was, using 20th century thought forms, an unprogrammed man. He was not set up as a punch card in a computer system. One thing that marks 20th century man is that he cannot visualize this because modern man is infiltrated by a concept of determinism. But the biblical position is clear. Man cannot be explained as totally determined and conditioned. A position that built the concept of the dignity of man. People today are trying to hang on to the dignity of man, and they do not know how to do it because they have lost the truth that man is made in the image of God. He was an unprogrammed man, a significant man in a significant history, and he could change history. A man who is somebody. And because he is an unprogrammed man and can really revolt, he has true moral guilt. Because of this, the Reformers understood something else. They had a biblical understanding of what Christ did. Jesus died on the cross in substitution and as a propitiation in order to save men from their true guilt. And we need to learn that. And we need to share that with the world. When we begin to tamper with the scriptural concept of true moral guilt, whether it be psychological tampering or theological tampering or any other kind of tampering, our view of what Jesus did will no longer be scriptural. Christ died for a man who had a true moral guilt because he had made a real and true choice with consequences. Now, as we talk about grace and nature here, everything begins with the kind of God who is there. That's what we mean by grace. This is the beginning and apex of the whole, and everything flows from this in a non-contradictory way. This God is there. He exists. This is the only system, the only religion that has this kind of God. The gods of the East are infinite by definition in the sense that they encompass all. The evil as well as the good, but they are not personal. The gods of the West were personal, but they were very limited. Amplified humanity, to borrow another term from Schaeffer. The Teutonic, the Roman, and the Greek gods were all the same. Personal, but not infinite. The Christian God, the God of the Bible, is personal, infinite. And everything else is creature. Modern man sees his relationship downward to the animal and to the machine. The Bible rejects this view of who man is. On the side of personality, you are related to God. You are not infinite, but finite. Nevertheless, you are truly personal. You are created in the image of the personal God who is there, who exists. The Renaissance set women free. So did the Reformation, but in a very different way. The women of the Renaissance in Italy were free, but at the great cost of general immorality. Why was this? It goes back to the then current view of nature and grace. But these things are never just theories, because men act according to the way they think. This element of the Renaissance period did not stop with the books themselves, but carried over into the kind of lives men lived. The autonomous man found himself in a duality. Schaeffer references Dante here, for example. The Reformation's biblical view was and is very different. It's not the Platonic view. The soul is not more important than the body. God made the whole man, and the whole man is important. The doctrine of the bodily resurrection of the dead is not an old-fashioned thing. It tells us that God loves the whole man, and the whole man is important. The biblical position stressed at the Reformation says that neither the Platonic view nor the humanist view will suffice. First, God made the whole man and he is interested in the whole man. Second, when the historic space-time fall took place, that means that man fell in the world. This is not a myth. It happened in space-time. It affected the whole man. And third, on the basis of Christ's work as Savior and having the knowledge that we possess in the revelation of the Scriptures, there is redemption for the whole man. There is real lordship of Christ over the whole man. That's where the authority is. Not in government, not the absolute authority. Not in government, but in Christ. And we see now our diagram of grace and nature. There's nothing autonomous, nothing apart from the lordship of Jesus Christ and the authority of the Scriptures above the line there that you see in grace. God made the whole man and is interested in the whole man, and the result is a unity. Thus, at the same time as the birth of modern man in the Renaissance, there was the Reformation's answer to his dilemma, trying to rectify this situation of nature and grace. How can they work together? The dualism in Renaissance man brought forth the modern forms of humanism along with modern man's sorrows. Early modern science was started by those who lived in the consensus and setting of Christianity. A man like J. Robert Oppenheimer, who said Christianity was needed to give birth to modern science. Christianity was necessary for the beginning of modern science for the simple reason that Christianity created a climate of thought which put men in a position to investigate the form of the universe. Naturally, as always, man rebels. Christianity gives an explanation of why it is objectively there. In contrast to Eastern thinking, the Hebrew Christian tradition affirms that God has created a true universe outside of himself. The universe is not an extension of the essence of God. It's not just a dream of God. There is something there to think about, objective, something there to deal with, to investigate, an objective reality. Christianity gives a certainty, a surety of objective reality and of cause and effect, a certainty that is strong enough to build on, a foundation. And therefore the object and history and cause and effect really exist. We can point to it, we can know it. Even Francis Bacon, where we got the scientific method, he didn't see science as autonomous. He saw it as placed within the revelation of the Scriptures. The early scientists also shared the outlook of Christianity in believing that there is a reasonable God who had created a reasonable universe, and thus man, by use of his reason, could find out the universe's form. It was the biblical mentality which gave birth to modern science. The thing we see today that has been, I don't want to use that word, left without a father. Science thus developed a science which dealt with the real, natural world, but which had not yet become naturalistic. And so by this time there was no idea of grace as we move into the early 1800s with Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant. By this time there was no idea of grace. The word didn't fit any longer. Rationalism was now well developed and entrenched. There was no concept of revelation in any area. Consequently, the problem was now defined, not in terms of natural and grace, or nature and grace, but nature and freedom. So now you could replace the word grace there with freedom. This would be the new idea at this particular time in the early 19th century, late 18th century. And this is a titanic change, expressing a secularized situation. Nature has totally devoured grace. And what is left in its place, upstairs, above the line, is the word freedom. To bring the phenomenal world of nature into relationship with the noumenal world of universals. So here at this time we find nature is now really so totally autonomous that determinism begins to emerge. Before this, determinism had almost always been confined to the area of physics, or in other words, to the machine portion of the universe, the things that make it go. But now, as you can see in this time, human freedom was seen as autonomous also. No need for God. Not only as, or the individual's freedom is seen not only as freedom without the need of redemption, but as absolute freedom. What is autonomous freedom? It means a freedom in which the individual is the center of the universe. Personal, inner feelings become an idol. Does that sound familiar? All that's left is individual self-expression. Right? This is how we get to the point where the individual self-expression is autonomous, so important that one might even think he's in the wrong body. Up until this time, the schools of philosophy in the West, from the time of the Greeks onward, had three important principles in common. The first is that they were rationalistic. It means that man begins absolutely and totally from himself, gathers the information concerning the particulars, and formulates the universals. In other words, man finds his way to truth through the process of logic. Second, they all believed in the rational. If a certain thing was true, the opposite was not true. If a thing was right, the opposite was wrong. This is the only way man can think, productively anyway. But we see the problem today, don't we? A man can be a woman. Not in nature, of course, but in the inner self. When man says that thinking in terms of antithesis is wrong, what he is really doing is using the concept of antithesis to deny antithesis. That is the way God has made us, and there is no other way to think. But we're rebels, aren't we? And we will rebel. Therefore, the basis of classical logic is that A is not non-A. A man is not a woman. What is involved in casting this away is very important in understanding contemporary thought. The third thing that men had always hoped for in philosophy was that they would be able to construct a unified field of knowledge, an answer that would encompass all of thought and all of life. The shift in science that occurred along with this shift in philosophy, the early scientists believed in the uniformity of natural causes. The uniformity of nature. How do you know that you can trust the sun will come up tomorrow? Because it came up yesterday and the day before and the day before. How can you be sure? Because it's God's created order. Without God, you have no guarantee. You have no such guarantee that something is responsible for upholding it. In other words, nature is not autonomous. Man is not autonomous. What they did not believe was the uniformity of natural causes in a closed system. We see this today, though. And that little phrase makes all the difference. It makes the difference between natural science and a science that is rooted in naturalistic philosophy. In other words, this is how we end up today, where people don't know the difference. People don't know when they're being lied to. And our science is no longer a pursuit of truth, the pursuit of knowledge. It's a manipulation. Modern science, or modern science, which we might find ourselves in today. The uniformity of natural causes in a closed system has become the dominant philosophy among scientists in this period we're talking about now, in the early 19th century, late 18th century. What happened? What happened? Under the influence of the presupposition of the uniformity of natural causes in a closed system, the machine does not merely embrace the sphere of physics, it now encompasses everything. In science, a significant change came about, therefore, as a result of a shift in emphasis from the uniformity of natural causes to the uniformity of natural causes in a closed system, a created order. Now, psychology and social science are also in the machine, and we're now left with a deterministic sea with no shore, ever floating. And in this model, freedom does not exist. God is dead, and man is free, but he's actually not free. Whenever you make such dualism and begin to set up one autonomous section below, the result is that the lower eats up the upper. And then your diagram there. Nature eats up the grace. Autonomy eats up unity. Diversity eats up unity. This, of course, has repercussions in the sphere of morality. Chemical determinism. If a man is determined, then what is right. If it feels good, do it. If my inner self is confused, then I must be in the wrong body. If all of life is only mechanism, if that is all there is, then morals really don't matter. They really don't count. There are none. Morals become only a word for a sociological framework. Morals become a means of manipulation by society in the midst of the machine. The word morals, by this time, is only a semantic connotation. It doesn't exist. Morals, in other words, today means non-morals. What is right, according to the new order in which we find ourselves today. So what is wrong with this? It goes back, once again, to Thomas Aquinas' insufficient view of the fall, where he said the body was fallen, but the intellect was not. This is an insufficient view of the fall. The whole man has fallen. And this gives certain things an autonomous structure. When nature is made autonomous, it soon ends up devouring God, grace, freedom, and eventually man. You can hang on to freedom for a while, desperately using the word freedom like Rousseau and his followers, but freedom becomes non-freedom. Health becomes non-health. Safety becomes non-safety. Right? Freedom becomes lockdowns. So the Reformation has given us a structure, a response through which to think about these ideas. Ultimately, Scripture is our source for reason, for all knowledge of God, salvation, and Christian living, godly living in the world. And so once again today we're going to see some fresh examples of just how contradictory, misguided, and vicious the media, one of the elements of the realm of nature here that's forgotten, has eaten up grace. You can see on your diagram there, the concept, the idea that the Reformation gave us was a way for both of these to interact, to interlock, to work together. The natural order is created by God. But in grace, through God, that's the only way that unity would exist. Above the line, in the realm of grace there, we have revelation from God. Faith and metaphysics. Below the line, the realm of man, we have perception, science, and observation, empirical. So now let's put this to work. Let's look at just how contradictory the world becomes when nature eats up grace, when it really gets as bad as it is today. Let's take a look around at a few stories from the news in the past couple days. We're going to get to Eric Clapton and his, I have to, as you know, here on YouTube, we have to use code words when we talk about certain things. So talk about Eric Clapton and his experience with the medical procedure and his outspokenness about it, and the attack that comes from the media, the lack of compassion, the lack of care, the media war machine striking out. Jeff Durbin at Apologia Church, Apologia Studios, also attacked, character assassination attempts to associate him with QAnon, because he is a pastor who speaks out boldly according to the Word of God, speaking truth in this culture, much needed truth that this culture doesn't appreciate, because this culture has rejected truth. So look at this before we get there. And also Barbara O'Neill, a naturopath, who's been banned from Australia for claiming that the body has an immune system. And of course, once again, it's about all we can say. I ask folks that we want to talk about these issues, and we're going to be as straightforward as we can be, and at the same time being careful to not lose our ability to come to you here on YouTube. Having said that, let me remind you that on Friday evenings, we usually give out the exact time we're going to go on in a YouTube post on that day. But on Friday evenings, we do a live stream on our website, armoroftruth.net. And this week, we'll be with you again live. And when we're on our website, we're on our own independent platform, and we can speak freely. For now. They'll get to that eventually too, but for now, we have the ability to speak openly without code words at armoroftruth.net. Join us over there. Drop in at armoroftruth.net. Look at some of the past. We've done nine shows on our independent platform over there now, and you can find those in a playlist at armoroftruth.net. But here's what we're looking at. Contradictions. Just reports from the world that show that some people don't actually agree or believe in this system where nature has eaten up grace and truth is all relative now and science is ultimate and absolute. In fact, scientism. American Airlines melts down over the mandate. So we saw Southwest Airlines go through this a few weeks ago. Now American Airlines experiencing a similar meltdown, thousands of flight cancellations, staffing issues, and a catastrophic disruption of services. Many airlines are so strapped with labor shortages in general that the mandate has pushed them further into the abyss whenever any minor disruption occurs. For American Airlines last weekend, it was severe weather, runway problems, and staffing shortages in correlation with the mandate that left passengers stranded and still cleaning up. So, in short, pilots protesting. Not many media outlets have touched on the issue, being what it's actually related to, which is this mandate, because they're afraid to give credit to the critics of Joe Biden. These companies are losing staff, not by being dismissed, but by walkouts, protests. All right. Going to move through these quickly. So there's another case where we see a major corporation in a very crucial sector of the economy, and its most important employees speaking up a little bit. What about this? What in the world is going on? People keep getting QR codes tattooed on their body. People all over the world are inking these machine scannable images. And they're even going viral for it. But in the world of QR codes, which stands for quick response, QR means quick response, the ink can be scanned to become songs, resumes, Instagram profiles, and even, wait for it, passports. And you know what we're talking about. We're talking about these. All right. In the 90s, you saw people getting barcodes tattooed. I didn't see many. That's crazy. But people do. Today, they want QR codes that they can scan with their phones. Now, I'm not here to tell you or pontificate on Mark of the Beast with you. But wow. Really? Wow. You might even do a QR code that links to a family photo album or some personal reminders. But how about a tattoo QR code that is your passport? That kind of passport. Once again, odd behavior. Let's take a trip over to this organization. I found this last week. Why aren't we talking about this more? Disease is just a flight away. According to the CDC, to protect America's health, CDC partners with the Department of Homeland Security to prevent the spread of things. CDC uses a do not board list. Now, do you folks know about something called the no-fly list? Well, that's what this is. This prevents travelers from boarding commercial flights if they are known or suspected to have a contagious disease that poses a threat to public health. Now, this has existed. It is a fact that this has existed before now, but never been used quite the way it is now. Sick travelers are placed on a lookout list. It's not only do you not get to fly, now you're on a list, and it's going to take you some time to jump through some hoops to get off that list, if you get off that list. Now, if you're someone who isn't participating in the secular sacrament, well, you might just be one who stays on that list permanently. It says these tools can be used for anyone who poses a threat, to the public's health. And that, as we've seen, can be totally arbitrary, can have no basis in truth. Placing people on the list, there are some criteria. We'll not go through it all. I just wanted to point out to you that there it is and it exists. You can check that out for yourself. And also, we have isolation systems in and around airports, quarantine stations. Comprehensive quarantine system serves to limit the introduction. Now, these have existed as well. They were always pretty quiet, but today being used in a different way. All right. And there are instructions here on how you can receive mail and packages if you happen to be caught up in one of these stations. So this is just interesting, Orwellian, I guess. I just wanted to share it with you as we move through these things. And of course, we put out on the website last week, Summer put out an article about the Great Narrative for the Great Reset, coming soon to the internet and to entertainment outlets all over. World Economic Forum to launch the Great Narrative to promote the Great Reset. Looking to establish a great narrative following the Great Reset agenda with the upcoming launch of the Great Narrative Initiative. Establishing a great narrative, the World Economic Forum is looking to assert an authoritative storyline to convince people why they need a great reset of society and the global economy. Now, we've got this article over at armortruth.net in the Culture Vault. I'll show you where you can find that right now. If you want to go to armortruth.net, if you scroll down on the home page, I've got this blown up right here. You can see on the right here, you can see where we've got, you can find my blog there. We've got a new blog up there as well. Here's the Culture Vault. This is what Summer has done for us. It's given us, she's provided for you an overview of what's going on in the culture while also giving you uplifting and important articles mixed in with it, such as this article, Apologetics, Emperor Tiberius, and the Resurrection of Jesus. I was doing some research for an upcoming show with our brother Days of Noah regarding the question or the objection to Christianity that it was created by the Roman elites. You know, that Christianity is a concoction of the Roman Empire, and Jesus didn't even exist to begin with. Well, in my research, I found a few articles, and this is one that Summer shared with us here. Check these out. And here is the Great Narrative article at armoroftruth.net. World Economic Forum launches the Great Narrative Initiative. Check it out. You can check out my blog. They got 3 posts over there now. The last one was this, Liberty Lost in Man's Autonomy. Some of you guys were asking last week if you could get a transcript of one of the shorts that we put out last week, or one of the short videos we put out. And I put it in a blog post, and this is what it is. This is the one making the claim or stating the fact that there are only 2 religions in the world, divine accomplishment and human achievement, and going on to expand on it from there. Talking about the autonomous self and the ideology of autonomy. Quoting from, using some quotes from Carl Truman, R.C. Sproul. I hope you'll check it out, folks. Now, let's get into the meat of the show today. Hopefully we've got a nice group joining us today. Thank you for being here, folks. And thanks to Human Error. Appreciate that. 5 pounds. That's heavy. Human Error, 5 pound donation, super chat. Thank you. It says keep up the good work. Thank you. Appreciate your support. All right. Rolling Stone. We're going to start with Eric Clapton today. What in the world is going on? Rolling Stone, right? They're there to tell you the truth. They're there to be objective. I think on their website, what did they say? It's their claim, their journalistic claim, honest journalism. Well, we'll see about that. We'll let you decide. Cheers. You think you might want one of these? You can check out the link in the description for your own little Armor of Truth. Different colors, lots of different designs for you to check out. All right, so Eric Clapton, for those of you who aren't aware, I'll try to speak about it, try to bring you up to speed as much as I can without, we have to be careful how we talk about it over here. Eric Clapton, within the past year, received both doses and had a severe reaction that affected his ability to play guitar. And that's kind of what he does. And he was very outspoken about it. And as you know, by now. Here's Rolling Stone's, here's their claim. Journalism that matters. Music that inspires. Well, whatever. We'll see about that. Also, Rolling Stone also was covering the story where Jeff Durbin was linked to QAnon, or the attempts to link him to QAnon. We'll show you how this works. This is the media war machine getting control of the narrative. So, let's start with this. I'm going to give you some highlights from the article. It says here, in the past, Eric Clapton has been reluctant to voice his political views. What you're going to see here, there's no reason for them to be disparaging or attacking or trying to assassinate his character. Really no reason for that other than he's an anti-vaxxer. That's the only thing that's happened within the past year to cause this. And they're pulling up anything they can find from as far back as 1968 to show you what a ridiculous person this is, to make it so that no one will listen to a thing this guy says because obviously he's a crazy racist, right? So in the past, Clapton's been reluctant to voice his political views. He told Rolling Stone in 1968, "What I'm doing now is just my way of thinking, but if it gets into a paper somewhere, people will say that what I'm saying is the way they ought to think, which is wrong because I'm only a musician. If they dig music, that's great, but they don't have to know what's going on in my head." Well, so they include this quote, while at the same time, well, let's just continue. Let me just continue. He says, but in recent months, Clapton has himself become a leading vaccine skeptic, part of a community that Dr. Fauci has said is part of the problem because you're allowing yourself to be a vehicle for spreading this to someone else. And while never explicitly condemning lockdowns, he said that live music might never recover. And he joined Van Morrison for 3 songs that amount to lockdown protest anthems. By way of a friend's social media account, he's also detailed what he called his disastrous experience after receiving 2 treatments, we'll say, of a specific brand, AZ. One of his claims early on was, quote, propaganda said the vaccine was safe for everyone, unquote. Clapton recently embarked on a U.S. tour booked in red states. Can you see what's happening here? First of all, we have to link him to right wing, right? Link him up to the right wing because that's the group right now that it's okay for the media to attack. So he recently embarked on a U.S. tour booked in red states despite surging transmission numbers and death rates, and at venues that largely don't require any kind of passport or proof. And he has drawn praise from conservative pundits. I'm sure he's drawn praise from progressive and liberal pundits as well, but that doesn't serve the article. It says, in Austin, he posed for backstage photos with Texas anti-vax mandate Governor Greg Abbott. That's his title now, anti-vax mandate Governor Greg Abbott, known for his attacks on abortion and voting rights. Attacks on abortion. Attacks. The sight of Clapton in backstage photos with the notorious governor amounted to a deal killer for some. Quote, I just deleted all my Clapton songs, unquote, went one comment on Abbott's Twitter feed. Clapton risked his reputation and part of his devoted fan base when he doubled down on his views. If he had a bad reaction, that's bad, says Bill Oakes, who ran RSO, Clapton's label, in the 70s. Quote, obviously most people haven't had this response. He says, it's a shame that this is the way that a lot of young Rolling Stone readers are going to read about him for the first time. He's one of the greats, and this is how he makes the headlines in his later years. Of course, Clapton declined to comment for this article, and I think that's a wise move. But as the article says here, what is he thinking? What is Clapton thinking? His fellow musicians don't know what to make of it all. Queen's guitarist Brian May referred to vaccine skeptics like Clapton as, quote, fruitcakes. Longtime Clapton collaborators and friends in the music business declined to comment about his current beliefs to Rolling Stone. As one of the managers of one of these rock and roll legends put it, I wouldn't want him to touch this. But the current controversy is prompting a fresh examination of Clapton's past behavior. And here we go. Let's go and find whatever we can in the past to pull up here now so we can discourage anyone from listening to what this man has to say about his experience. In other words, let's get control of this narrative. So they're going back into his past to see what they can find to do a character assassination on him. And they pulled out some jarringly racist statements that he made in the early parts of his career. The article says, how did we get from admiration and empathy to bewilderment and even a feeling of betrayal? Feeling of betrayal because the man has an opinion about medical procedure? Is that where we are? Has nature eaten up grace? In the summer of 1976, Dave Wakeling thought he knew Clapton too. But when he saw Clapton at the Odeon Theater in Birmingham in August 1976, Clapton began making vile racist comments from the stage. In remarks he has never denied, he talked about how the influx of immigrants to the UK would result in the country being a colony, quote, being a colony within 10 years, unquote. He also went on an extended jag about how foreigners, quote unquote foreigners, should leave Great Britain. Okay. What that has to do with today and what Clapton's talking about now is absolutely nothing. But what's being done here is an attempt at character assassination. Now, obviously, we're not going to stand behind racist comments. That's not the point here. Point here is, look what's being done. Let's continue. Also in the crowd was author Carol Phillips, then a high school student and admirer of Clapton's work. But like so many that night at the Odeon, Phillips was taken aback at Clapton's tirades. Said it hung like a toxic cloud over the whole evening. As one of the few black people in the crowd, Phillips says he also felt all eyes were kind of upon me and then swiveled away from me. Clapton's comments shocked his bandmates too. Did you hear that? Clapton's comments shocked his bandmates. In other words, that means that this was not typical rhetoric from him. We've got this account. But it's enough for Rolling Stone. What Eric said was a total surprise, recalls George Terry, a member of Clapton's band at the time. A total surprise, meaning that it's not typical. I'm not defending Eric Clapton in any way. I'm just reading an article for you. We're doing what we do here. We're analyzing the narrative. We're taking a look at what's being said and trying to figure out, what does it all mean? But maybe even more troubling was how he displayed a predilection for some racial stereotypes, which might actually could very well be the case. Still irrelevant to what's being said and done today. It's not irrelevant. The comments are not irrelevant. They are what they are, and if they're deplorable, they're deplorable. But what we're talking about here is why. Why now? Why pull them out now? Why reach back to 1968 and bring this up today? Would you do the same for someone who was of your opinion? Someone who shared your side in this debate? Rolling Stone has put Clapton on its cover 8 times since 1968, and as recently as 2015, he was ranked second on Rolling Stone's list of the 100 greatest guitarists. I was completely shocked, says agitprop writer and performer Red Saunders, who was shown a copy of a published report of Clapton's comments shortly after the concert. The concert that occurred in 1968. He said, quote, "What's going on, Eric? You've got a touch of brain damage. Own up. Half your music is black. You're rock music's biggest colonist. You're a good musician, but where would you be without the blues and R&B?" Could be very relevant statements. Still, not the point. Speaking to Rolling Stone in 2017, he said, quote, "I just have to face the guy that this is Clapton speaking, I just have to face the guy that I became when I was fueled on drugs and alcohol. It's incomprehensible to me in a way that I got so far out, and there was no one there to challenge me." So we have a man here who was a hardcore addict, alcohol, heroin, probably other things. Where's the compassion? Where's the sympathy? Right? This is struggle. This is what it looks like when the media war machine attacks one of its own. Rolling Stone, attacking one of its golden boys. They refer to Clapton here as a privileged member of rock's ruling class. So we have to conjure up the concept of privilege, of course. Dog whistles. That's what they like to use. They like to use the term dog whistles on that side of the argument. So we'll use it here too. There's a dog whistle. In his 2007 memoir, Clapton addressed the controversy once again, writing his own stage comments in Birmingham were, quote, "never meant to be a racial statement. It was more of an attack against the then government policies on cheap labor and the cultural confusion and overcrowding that resulted from what was clearly a greed-based policy," unquote. He had an idea. He had a political position. Popped his mouth off in 1968. In the documentary, Eric Clapton, Life in 12 Bars, 2017, Clapton again denied racist insensitivity, citing friendships with black people, and again blamed the moment on his massive alcohol intake of the time. Where's the sympathy? He said this, quote, "I did offensive things. I was a nasty person." In a striking admission, says Rolling Stone. He said that his Birmingham rant was full tilt racist. He says, "I'm not excusing myself. It was an awful thing to do," he said. Now, Rolling Stone reached out to Buddy Guy, who is a black man, blues musician. And I think in this case they were goading him. They were prodding him. They wanted Buddy Guy to take up their argument with him. Buddy Guy wasn't biting. I think he's smarter than that. He says, this is Buddy Guy. "I didn't pay attention to what people were saying back then." He says, "You had white people saying this, black people saying that. Whatever somebody wants to say or feel, that's okay with me," unquote. Right? Buddy Guy understands that we're living in a fallen creation, and people are flawed as they can be. Doesn't excuse bad behavior, but why do we single some people out and not others? That's what we're dealing with. The article continues and says, "For anyone who's read Clapton's memoir closely, his recent turn, whatever that means, may not be all that jarring." See, they're comparing a racist tirade from 1968 with his description of his experience today from receiving a medical treatment that went wrong. Why would they do that? Why do they need to do that? Why is this medical procedure that important? He wrote, "It was my normal thing when I was angry to contest authority." And he admitted to a tendency to conspiracy phobia in all things of this nature, including politics. Clapton's current public views are a hot mess of those tendencies chummed up by a global pandemic, fake news, and his own health issues. In the past few years, Clapton's health, his hands in particular, have made more headlines than his recent albums. He confessed to Rolling Stone that he was having a, quote, neurological thing that's tricky, that affects my hands, unquote. This is known as what it is peripheral neuropathy. This can cause damage to a person's peripheral nerves, leading to burning or aching pain in the arms and legs. Last year, Clapton began watching videos by Ivor Cummins, a chemical engineer and author who has questioned the British government's handling of, as you might say, the pandemic. I was trying to keep my mouth shut, said Clapton, but I was following the channel avidly. And Clapton made his own feelings first known by joining with Van Morrison for a song called Stand and Deliver, a single that connected the lockdown to individual freedom. I like the way Rolling Stone decided to put that. A single that connected the lockdown to individual freedom, as though the connection isn't obvious, as though it isn't clear that it's about individual freedom from the start. No, they were loosely connecting the lockdown with individual freedom. It says, quote, one of the lyrics of the song says, "Do you want to be a free man or do you want to be a slave?" Well, unquote. Clapton issued a statement about the collaboration. He says, "We must stand up and be counted because we need to find a way out of this mess. The alternative isn't worth thinking about." Now, when Clapton began receiving flack for his comments, and at the end of the show today, I'm going to try anyway to play a music video for you from Eric Clapton, a song that he's written called "This Has Gotta Stop." That's about all we'll say about it. Well, you'll hear it at the end of the show today. I think. I'm still trying to work my nerve up to do that. We'll see how it goes. But when Clapton began receiving flack for his comments, he doubled down. He posted comments on social media through the account of his friend, architect, and fellow skeptic, Robin Minotti. He told Oracle Films, this is a website that claims to fight for open debate and freedom of information in the face of global government encroachment and big tech censorship. He said that after a second procedure, his hands didn't really work and that it accelerated his condition. He said, "I expected it to be something that would gradually grow worse as I got older, into my 80s or whatever," he said. "But this ramped up on a scale of 10, from 3 to 8 or 9. Agony, chronic pain. It took my immune system and shook it around." Clapton said he lost the use of his hands for 3 weeks. He told Oracle Films that he could feel the alienation from his peers and even family members as he began to come out about this. Now, from the medical side, Rolling Stone includes a statement from the medical side. According to Dr. Matthew Fink, chairman of the Department of Neurology at Weill Cornell Medical College, such a reaction is plausible with patients dealing with Clapton's neurological condition. As long as there have been these kind of treatments around, let's start with V, there have always been some cases of what we call post-shot or post-infectious inflammatory disorders that can affect the peripheral nerves. So, according to this doctor, it's quite common for this to happen. Okay. Can't make any more comments about it here, but we'll just leave that laying there. He added that the AZ brand, in particular, has been linked to rare cases of neurological disorder. It can affect your hands and feet quite severely. I have a case in my own family of a family member who received it and experienced this excruciating event as well. So he says, so I can understand as a guitarist how that could really affect him. He says, and yet Fink, Rolling Stone continues here, and yet Fink, who says he loves Clapton's work with Cream, is concerned about the message as much as the messenger. He says you're not going to condemn all of these treatments because of that, because the reality is that these treatments are such life-saving treatments for the vast majority of people that receive them. That can be debated. Anyway, he says the benefits so far outweigh any of the risks, in his opinion. I would never tell someone we should stop giving them. Rolling Stone continues here and says, thanks in part to skeptics, only 56% of the U.S. population is currently inoculated. So where is choice? Where does personal choice come in? Well, you can't have a personal choice because it's a matter of life and death. Is it? Is it? Because I see a lot of people suffering as a result of the response to this so-called event. It says, Rolling Stone says here, but as with his fumbled responses to his 1976 rant, Clapton couldn't seem to leave well enough alone. He declared in a statement that he wouldn't play for discriminated audiences, meaning that he would only play venues that did not require proof of treatment. And that is unacceptable in the mainstream today. It's unacceptable to have that position in the mainstream today. Why is that? In his interview with Oracle Films, Clapton complained that after he expressed his views, I was labeled as a Trump supporter. And that's what we mean. We're assessing the narrative. Anyone, doesn't matter what your actual views are, anyone who does not go along with the official narrative is labeled with these people over here. Now, conservative young gun pundit Michael Knowles was quoted here in Rolling Stone. 31 years of age, younger than most of Clapton's fans. He thinks the guitarist's stance against the medical establishment is staying true to his rock roots. He says, it's terrific. There's something really authentic about a rock star speaking up against authority. That is what rock and roll used to represent. And as it aged, it simply came into conformity with the prevailing established opinions of society. Well, as Rolling Stone indicates to us today, Eric Clapton trusts his audience to make their own medical decisions, and we used to do that more generally in this country. We don't seem to do that much anymore, said Knowles. So, Rolling Stone, I guess in the interest of fair reporting, included that very small blurb in support of Clapton and his opinion and his description of his experience. But it finishes up here to say, all of this has left fans grappling with the legacy of a musician. Now, this is Rolling Stone. I don't probably think fans of Eric Clapton, really? Are you questioning whether you still like the music because he has an opinion about the jab? Really? All of this has left fans grappling with the legacy of a musician who is potentially putting people's lives at risk. I don't get it. I always thought he was a liberal, says one music industry veteran who has worked with Clapton over the years. Quote, I met him a number of times, and he's quite the gentleman, mature and well-spoken and measured. That seems to contradict all the earlier stuff we heard, right? In the article, you can see the contradictions. What they're doing is they're pulling out an event from 50 years ago that they want to use to discredit him so that no one will pay attention to the experience he claims to have had. Why is that fair? Why is that fair? Why is that acceptable? Well, it's not acceptable. That's what I'm here to say. Anyway, this person said that he's quite the gentleman. He's mature, well-spoken, and measured. So I'm shocked. Most of his audience is shocked by this. I won't see him in concert anymore. Really? You won't see someone you think is the greatest musician of all. You're not going to see him anymore because he's got an opinion about a medical procedure? He said, that's it. How could anyone care about your fans and be an anti-vaxxer? There you go. How do we reconcile some of his views with his music? Asks Rolling Stone. Is it still possible to enjoy Eric Clapton? At radio station WPLR, a leading classic rock station in Connecticut, Chaz, a morning morning show DJ, says Clapton is a Mount Rushmore figure. Says but he says this, quote, if I'm at a family dinner and Grandpa is saying something I completely disagree with, I'll ignore it and say, pass the mashed potatoes. That's the way I'm feeling this about Clapton, unquote. Rolling Stone adds on here, of the 12,000 or so people who began streaming into the Dickies Arena in Fort Worth, Texas on September 13th, the first date of Clapton's Fall American Tour, it was that kind of meal. Let's just ignore Grandpa. Where's the sympathy? Where's the compassion? You don't get it unless you're on our team, right? That's what they're saying. As of this writing, no illnesses connected to the tour have been reported. So how about a big fat nothing burger from Rolling Stone? They say here, they end up the article, but guitar in hand, he stood and for now remains at the crossroads of a cultural civil war. Well, Rolling Stone has always been a corporate schlock rag anyway. Sorry. Who's watching? Okay, so, and you can see, looking around the stories that go along with this, Travis Tritt, more from Rolling Stone, Travis Tritt, Eric Clapton form a supergroup of ignorance. Now, there's fair journalism for you. Yeah, this is from Rolling Stone, who claims journalism that matters, music that inspires, as they call a couple guys who don't agree with their viewpoint here, ignorant. The country music singer is taking COVID cues from the British guitarist, Clapton, about American freedoms. Now, we're not going to get into this article. You can check it out if you like, but I'm just showing you a couple of headlines from around here. Here's more. There is a full-on assault on Eric Clapton today. Article here from UltimateClassicRock.com. When Eric Clapton felt insulted by Eddie Van Halen, Brian May. We get quotes from Brian May and Van Halen here, bringing up what the closet racist, and Eric Clapton's not a guy you can trust. That's what we're hearing. Here it is from NBC News. Eric Clapton's COVID vaccine conspiracies mark a sad final act. Bigotry and ignorance in the age of the internet have a way of catching up with you, and Clapton's racism and conspiracy theories can no longer be ignored. There you go. There you go. But what about the facts? What about the facts? What about the facts? They don't matter anymore. People magazine headline says Eric Clapton's racist rant, and another one in 1976 apparently resurfaces. It resurfaces. Right, it just came up again after announcing lockdown protest song with Van Morrison. So you can see what's going on here. All right, so there's Clapton. Now we move on to QAnon and Pastor Jeff Durbin. And what has the media done here? What are we looking at here? All right, so I want to move quickly through these first stories here to get to the meat where we're going to let Durbin explain what happened. I'm going to share with you, just once again, analyzing the narrative. What is going on? How are they trying to get a hold of anyone who's out there actually speaking truth? Not necessarily about health care at the moment, as far at least regarding vaccines or anything like that, but abortion, or just speaking boldly according to the Word of God today. Well, you might end up associated with a strange movement like QAnon. And so here is the foundation of the story. This comes from rawstory.com. QAnon leader motivated to run for Congress by far-right pastor who advocates death for abortions, report. Now, there's some sensationalism. Right. So in the article, it says here, a former karate, a new article by the Phoenix New Times. We'll show in just a minute, and we'll show you how the interview went. Durbin shared with us how the interview actually went. This all started at the Phoenix New Times, and it all blossomed from there. A new article by the Phoenix New Times is profiling the man Watkins credits. So this Watkins character here, Ron Watkins, the manager. I guess, Raw Story seems to think that Ron Watkins is like, he is Q. This week, Ron Watkins, the manager of the far-right message board 8kun, and rumored to be Q of the QAnon conspiracy theory movement, announced his intent to run for Congress in Arizona. A new article by Phoenix New Times is profiling the man Watkins credits with persuading him to run for office. Let me just tell you what I think this is, and I'm going to go out on the rabbit hole limb here. This guy is an operation. Now, Pastor Durbin and Apologia Studios and Apologia Church, if they said that, it wouldn't. They can't say that because he was defending himself. He was defending his own honor in light of this. But I can say it. This guy, one of two things. I can't know for sure, but he's one of two things. He's crazy, or he's an agent. He's crazy, or he is part of an operation. One of the two, because you can't be sane. And let's just continue. A former karate champion, Pastor Jeff Durbin, has been cultivating influence nationwide over the past decade from Mesa. This is in Arizona. The media arm of the church, Apologia Studios, which Durbin founded in 2015, has hundreds of thousands of subscribers and millions of views on YouTube, and that'll get you in trouble if you start speaking boldly, where it produces daily far-right political content. I invite you to go to Apologia, the website, Facebook, YouTube channel. Far-right political content. It's church. Reported Katja Schwenk, that's coming out of Phoenix New Times. In an email to Phoenix New Times, Durbin writes that he has trained hundreds of churches nationwide to lobby against abortions. It's because we're Christians. That's what we do. He also occasionally has drawn national headlines for some of his most extremist moves, calling for women to be executed for abortions. Now, that needs some context, of course. For instance, and refusing to close his church's doors in the early days of the pandemic. Now, what is this really about? Is this about Q? Or is this about somebody not going along with the official narrative regarding something else? According to the report, Durbin has stood by his call. He says about his QAnon. Here he goes. The QAnon conspiracy theory posits that America is controlled by a secret cabal of child trafficking cannibal Satanists. That's one way. That's one way to wrap it up. The movement ties together a number of anti-Semitic tropes and has been linked to terroristic violence threats. So you see what's been done here. Jeff Durbin, who's going to tell you his position on Q in just a minute, has been associated with anti-Semitic tropes, terrorism, and the QAnon movement. But Ron Watkins, for his part, has denied being Q, saying he does not know the actual identity of the anonymous poster. Right? Because it's an operation. Come on, guys. We know what this thing is. All right, so a couple other. You can see CBS News was on this as well. QAnon promoter Ron Watkins running for Congress in Arizona. I mean, I never heard of this guy until last week. But this is how you thrust something up. Throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. All right, here you go from the Intelligencer. Who is Ron Watkins, the QAnon celebrity running for office? QAnon's Ron Watkins says he's running for Congress from Vice. He says in Vice, also reporting on this, says Watkins says he was inspired to run for office after recently hearing a sermon from Pastor Jeff Durbin out of Apologia Church in Mesa, Arizona. Do you know? And of course, they once again bring up Pastor Durbin's. They call him a right-wing minister. If you're a Christian, you're not anything other than. But anyway, a right-wing minister who has said he wants to execute women who have abortions, and they provide some context with that there. Let Durbin speak for himself. It's his position there. But Ron Watkins, Q, apparently, said this: I've come to realize that following God's word is not always the easiest route, but if we don't follow our beliefs in the founding principles of our nation, it will crumble. This must stop now, Watkins said. Therefore, I have decided to double down with God as my compass to take this fight to the swamp of Washington, D.C. I am here to formally announce my run for Congress in Arizona, District Number 1. Okay. So what are we doing? We're taking Christians. We're taking the Christian worldview, all of it. We're using Pastor Durbin as the symbol for that, and then associating it with Q, associating it with terrorism. And here's a tweet. Well, it's official. QAnon Ron Watkins, after consultation with his pastor. Do you see that there? Is Jeff Durbin Ron Watkins' pastor? Was he ever Ron Watkins' pastor? Let's get some context on this, all right? So we'll let Jeff Durbin explain it himself. We'll go here. Got some timestamps for you here. Okay, Durbin is going to explain what happened here. Now you heard it. You heard it there. Also from Rolling Stone, that Ron Watkins' pastor, who happens to be Jeff Durbin, inspired him to do this. So the Ron Watkins pastor, the pastor of Q, the pastor of the manager of QAnon, is that true at all?
Who? Yeah, it's
So
been fun.
yeah, it's been interesting. So to start this discussion, some of you guys saw the title, so you're here because of that. What happened is that we had a visitor to our church. As far as I know, it was for 2 weekends, 2 weekends only. A visitor to our church named Ron Watkins. We didn't know him. We are not his pastor. And not to say we don't want to love the guy and all the rest. It's just say that that's the current state of where we're at. We're not his pastor. He's not a member of our body. He was just a visitor. He visited during 2 sermons. One was a Christian response to mandatory cookies, and one was defending essential Christian truths. And it had a big impact on him. The sermon on Christian response to mandatory cookies had a big impact on him. And so he announced, I think, his candidacy.
To run to Congress?
Yes, I think it's for Congress. Yeah,
In Arizona.
I think, yeah, in Arizona.
Congress, yeah.
And so he announced that publicly, and he mentioned that it was my sermon that inspired him to do so. Because of that, apparently he has a lot of people watching him, and we didn't have a relationship with him, know him. I found out after I actually spoke to him that he was associated with QAnon or Q. I don't even know all the details about it because I'm not in that world.
But you're his pastor, though.
Apparently, I'm his pastor. And so what happened was a publication, local publication known as the Phoenix New Times, one of the most leftist, liberal, trash publications
Should be called the High Times.
in the history of this nation, contacted me. And I know the Phoenix New Times. I know who they are. I know where they're at. I know their worldview. And so they contacted me to ask some questions about Ron Watkins because he had visited our church and said that my sermon inspired him to run for Congress. So apparently that made me his pastor. And Phoenix New Times, I think, based upon the article that they put out and the questions that they asked and my responses, they already knew what they were going to write. And they were already prepared to write it. I think they were just checking the box in terms of, let me just talk to this guy. And so what happened was the Phoenix New Times published an article that was not fully honest at all with what I gave to them in terms of my full responses to their questions about how we feel about QAnon. It's a destructive and embarrassing movement. We've called people to repent for the things that have been spread through QAnon. We've done a show repudiating QAnon before. We find it to be a deplorable, a destructive, and an embarrassing movement.
All right. So there you go. There's the pastor of the guy who runs QAnon, apparently, right? Okay, so there's his position. Now let's take it back to where it all began. But here is the article from the Phoenix New Times. And what I'm going to share with you here is Durbin's Facebook post where he posted the transcript of the interview. So we'll look at the interview right quick. Look at it right quick. If QAnon's grip on the Arizona GOP wasn't clear already, Ron Watkins made it so last week when the Q figurehead. Really? Anybody in the chat, had you ever heard of Ron Watkins before today? Anyway, maybe you had. I guess I don't pay attention to that. Anyway, he announced that he is running for Congress in Arizona. Watkins' candidacy is a far-fetched, to put it lightly. So why are you reporting on it anyway? Anyway, to put it lightly, although he's built a major following online, he's never held any kind of elected office, and it's not clear if he's ever lived in the state. But his campaign does appear to draw on local inspiration from Jeff Durbin, an extremist, that's another word for terrorist, pastor in Mesa who has built his church into a sprawling media organization, and a national anti-abortion lobbying group. What's wrong with that? Right? And if your worldview is atheism, why do you care? Anyway, in Watkins' initial video announcing his bid to unseat Democrat Tom O'Halloran, which he called the dirtiest Democrat in the D.C. swamp, he cited a recent sermon that Durbin gave at Apologia Church in Mesa. That sermon was, anyway, for those of you who don't know, was the sermon on a Christian response to mandatory cookies or jabs. But as the article here, the Phoenix New Times says, Durbin convinced him, Watkins said, to double down with God as my compass, to take this fight to the swamp of Washington, D.C. This is an operation, folks. He's either just a loon or he's an operation. It's not organic. This is not organic. Anyway, a former karate champion, Durbin has been cultivating influence nationwide. So they go on to give a little more about his background that we've already read. But once again, they call him far-right political content. They mention that he's got lots of subscribers. They say here Durbin also runs End Abortion Now, an anti-abortion group. Anti-abortion, another way to say that would be pro-life. That's the appropriate way. In an email to Phoenix New Times, Durbin, it's either making it out like, well, Durbin just emailed us and told us it. No, this was an interview. Anyway, in an email to Phoenix New Times, Durbin writes that he has trained hundreds of churches. We read this in the last one. So we got some quotes they quoted this article in the previous article we read. From Ron Watkins, was this his Facebook, I guess? Anyway, from Ron Watkins said, I attended Pastor Jeff's service last Sunday. It was the most inspirational sermon of God's Word that I have ever heard. He also occasionally has drawn national headlines for some of his most extremist moves. We've read this. It seems that Watkins discovered Apologia Church when which Durbin says is Reformed Baptist here in Arizona. For years, Watkins, an American, was living abroad in the Philippines and then Japan, but he has been hanging around Phoenix for the past several weeks, meeting with Carrie Lake and petitioning in vain for a meeting with Attorney General Mark Brnovich, who so far has snubbed him. Durbin distanced himself from Watkins. Yes, he didn't have to distance himself. There is no connection. However, when the New Times inquired about his candidacy, although Watkins has been attending sermons, now there is a snaky claim. Attending sermons. We'll get the truth of that in just a moment. Durbin says he's not a member of Apologia Church, and furthermore, the church as a practice would not endorse political candidates anyway. As for QAnon, Durbin calls the movement destructive and embarrassing. Right, that's all they said. 3 words, destructive and embarrassing. You heard Jeff's position on it. Durbin said, quote, if the rumors about his involvement with Q were true and verified by us, we would confront him about that. Watkins' association with QAnon is hardly a rumor. I guess, if you say so. For years, he ran the often extremist message board 8chan, now rebranded as 8kun, whatever. I have no idea about that. Alongside his father, Jim Watkins, who still owns the site. Watkins and his father are believed by some to have posted the initial messages from Q on the forum, which are central to the QAnon conspiracy theory. Watkins announced his official departure from 8chan last November, and on and on and on. So, and so far, Watkins appears to be serious about his candidacy, claiming to the Arizona public that he has an address in Sedona and that he has vague, and so far improved, family ties to Arizona. He says, I have a strong chance to win out there. All right, so here's Katja Schwenk, the author, the writer here, the reporter on this article. Now, let's dig in just a bit here. Let's see. So the Facebook post, let's see. Here's the Facebook post. I'm not logged in at the moment, so I got this mess on the bottom. But the Facebook post that Jeff put up on Apologia Studio, it's right here. I'm going to read a little bit of it from you. So this is what Jeff Durbin actually said. We read for you the article that started this whole firestorm. So Jeff said in response, thank you for messaging me before writing the article. I'd be happy, he said, I'd be happy to receive any more questions you may have related to any other subject. So they contacted him. Of course, the article made it look like Jeff Durbin contacted them. They don't qualify that. They don't really have to, but it'd be nice. I'd be happy to receive any more questions you may have related to any other subject you intend on writing about in reference to us. Although you've demonstrated your own commitments in your questions, referring to our work saving thousands of children at abortion mills as harassment, I do want to honor your attempt to come to the source and attempt journalistic integrity. So thank you again. Here are the answers to your questions. So the first question was, when did you start Apologia Studios? None of that. She didn't really care about much of that. But Apologia, I'll share it with you. Apologia Studios started in 2015. The church was planted while I was the chaplain at a drug rehabilitation hospital almost 12 years ago. It started as a church full of ex-drug and alcohol addicts in the hospital's family building. These were people who were broken and lost and found life, peace, and forgiveness in Jesus Christ, who died for sinners and rose again from the dead. He didn't miss his opportunity to share the gospel where it needed to be shared. The next question was, last week Ron Watkins said that you inspired him to run for Congress. Do you support his candidacy? Durbin said, Ron Watkins isn't a member of Apologia Church, and to my knowledge, he has only attended 2 services. I am not his pastor. I am not his pastor, he says. I do not have any specific knowledge of his beliefs. Durbin says, in his interview, I am not his pastor. That doesn't matter. The Phoenix New Times didn't say it, but everyone who followed up on their article did say it and call him Ron Watkins' pastor. You see how it works? You see how character assassination, guilt by association works? It says, I do not have any specific knowledge of his beliefs, commitments, or convictions related to law or politics in our country. I only recently learned about the gentleman and the claims about his connection to QAnon. Both myself and the other elders at Apologia Church have spoken against the QAnon movement. We find it to be a destructive and embarrassing movement that has Now, that's all she said was, Durbin says the movement is destructive and embarrassing. The full quote was, a destructive and embarrassing movement that has repeatedly violated God's standards of critical thinking, accusations, and evidence. We've spoken against it publicly and called people to repent of the shameful slander and abysmal thinking that has propagated within the group. We believe that it represents a destructive and embarrassing element that distracts from the real issues and the real solution that our country needs, which is Jesus Christ. We believe that God calls his people to uphold justice. This is the full answer. You saw all she said was, Durbin says it's a destructive and embarrassing movement. None of this other stuff. We believe that God calls his people to uphold justice and to correct oppression, Isaiah 1:17. Legislative issues are issues that relate to public morality and moral oughts. We believe that God is the standard of morality and ethical absolutes, and that Christ, as the one with final authority, has something to say about law, righteousness, and justice in society. So we bring the claims of Christ and God's law into these political discussions. However, we believe that it is wrong for a Christian church to engage in partisan political promotion related to supporting a particular candidate's run from the pulpit. We do not have any knowledge of Ron Watkins' overall belief system. We would not promote anyone's candidacy officially as a church, and if the rumors about his involvement with Q were true and verified by us, we would confront that with him speedily. That's the full answer. What did What did the reporter, Katja Schwink, report? Durbin said it was a destructive and embarrassing movement. So she's responsible. She's responsible for the way this article was taken and spread all over the place, associating Durbin as being the pastor of Q, right? The next question was, you've drawn some criticism for harassment at abortion clinics and arguing that women should face the death penalty for abortions. Do you stand by those claims? So it goes on. I'm more interested in the QAnon stuff here in this article. And you can check this out for yourself. But I want to share this too. The last question. She says, Katja Swink asks, I'd be interested to hear how you'd describe Apologia Church's beliefs, the gospel. Jeff says, thank you so much for asking this question, which we all want that question. We are a Reformed Baptist church. We are in the historic tradition of the Christian church and hold to the ancient creeds and confessions of the church. Our beliefs are fundamentally in line with the beliefs and worldview of the Christians who came to this nation and provided its foundation. Those would be the Puritans. Whether it was the Huguenots, the Covenanters, or the Puritans, we are in that historic tradition. The gospel is the story of God's love for sinners. We are all rebels and we are all guilty of sin against God and one another. God is holy. He is love. He is merciful and full of grace. He is also just. Because we have sinned against God, we all rightly deserve judgment. However, God loves sinners so much that Christ died for us. He died to take the place and the punishment of his people. Jesus Christ is God incarnate. He lived the righteous, blameless, and perfect life that we all have failed. He died a death on the cross that we all deserve, and he conquered our greatest enemy by rising again from the dead. He is ascended and seated at the right hand of God the Father. There will be a day of judgment, and our only hope is to turn from sin and to trust in Christ and in Christ alone for forgiveness and salvation. This gift of eternal life, righteousness, and forgiveness is a free gift and available to all who turn to Christ in faith. Our hope is that the whole world, including you, Katya, would experience this powerful gift of life. I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any other questions. Signed, Jeff Durbin. So there it is. It's all wrapped up and settled. Jeff Durbin is the pastor of Q, right? So this is how it works. Now let's get a couple more comments from Jeff here on this.
Who messaged me, and they just went running with an article. So next thing you know, this first article posts, and then Rolling Stones picks it up, and several other publications picked up stuff from the article. Rolling Stones actually published it, and they called me Ron Watkins' pastor. Yep. Ron Watkins' pastor. And so my assistant, we gotta love Christine, our assistant, she messaged Rolling Stones, and she was like, he is not Ron Watkins' pastor. Like, you guys need to repent. Lying is a sin. She said that. Yeah, she did. She was like, you need to repent. Lying is a sin. And
well,
so
I guess
Rolling Stones was
clearly Rolling Stone needs to repent. We found that out today.
Forced after they published the article to correct their own article because they didn't even bother to fact check.
Really?
Yeah. Didn't even bother.
Everybody else didn't fact check.
Yeah, everybody else needs to do it but them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, didn't fact check. So they had to change it, posting it, and so then it goes on, and now across these different media platforms, you have an attempt to associate the extremist far right pastor Jeff Durbin with QAnon. And it doesn't matter how many times we repudiated QAnon. It doesn't matter how deplorable we think QAnon as a movement is.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much I've spoken against it or called people even to repent of the slander that they've shared that's come from QAnon. They had their story. They wanted to run with it, and that's what we got.
Okay, and why is this important? Why is this important to share? Why is it important to speak back against this? Let's hear what Durbin said.
Let's talk about why this is important. It's important because from a Christian perspective, I just read you a passage from the law of God. That's right after the Ten Commandments, where God actually calls people not to take party to, false accusations. Don't lie about people. Don't lie about people in court. Don't go along with the masses to lie about somebody in court. God takes very seriously this: you shall not lie.
Yep.
And you shall not lie, by the way, is a Christian thing. It's not necessary in secularism or atheism. It's not necessary. You shall not lie is not an absolute standard in those worldview systems. It's not. You can't say it's an absolute standard and a moral ought for human beings not to lie to one another. In atheism, if all of us are just African apes descended from fish and bacteria, then there's no absolute standard not to lie. So it's important to start this discussion to say from the Christians are the ones that own the ground here in terms of there's an absolute standard not to lie.
There you go. And that's the truth. This is why we started the show off today with you. What has the Reformation given us here as we mark once again on Sunday the 31st, the Reformation with Reformation Day? Some more comments here from Durbin about this.
Isn't it amazing? But anyways, the Christian worldview has this at its basis, ready, in terms of morality. You shall not lie. And that moves in God's law in spectacular ways. Like right after God says that, he begins to expand upon it. Like, you shall not lie. What's it look like? Well, don't take part in like where the masses are going to bring false accusations. Don't be a false accuser in a court of law. Don't bring false testimony in a court of law. And then God actually has some case law examples of like what it looks like when someone is lying in court. And he actually protects the court. And this is one of my very favorite things, and I wish we'd get back to it. I truly wish we'd get back to it, where in court, if you have a witness who's making a claim, the Christian worldview has cross-examination. Like, that's in the court. Like, God's standard says there must be cross-examination. You can't just believe a witness, because believe it or not, fallen world, people lie. They lie through their teeth. Just look at Joe Biden. So
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, they lie through their teeth, right? So people lie. In this world, people lie, and it should always be repented of, and you need to call out lies wherever there are lies. But in God's court system, he says that when you have someone that brings an accusation, there must be cross-examination. So if you like cross-examination in courts, thank Moses, okay? You can thank Jesus for that, okay? But there must be cross-examination. And God's law says that if you find out that that witness was lying and they're accusing somebody and lying about it, then God says that the witness, who was false witness, has to now get the punishment that would have been given to the accused had they been believed. That's pretty awesome, right? That God protects the court. How much protection does it offer to the court when the witness who's saying this happened knows if I'm caught lying, I'm going to get the punishment myself? That's a beautiful way to protect the court.
Such a novel idea.
It's such a wonderful thing, and that's all from God's law.
There you go. So why is it, do we think, that the world has rejected God? The world hates Jesus and hates Christians? Because you're held responsible for your actions, according to this worldview. And one more piece here I want to share with you. I think we've got time to do it. It's just a couple minutes here at the end of the show where Jeff shares a piece about separation of church and state. What is that concept? Where did it come from? All right. Here we go. If
is inherently one based on faith.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Separation of church and state, many secularists today learn that a terminology and don't understand the historical background of it. The separation of church and state is something that Christians developed based on Scripture and the Christian tradition. So in other words, we gave that to the world. We developed that doctrine, that tradition of separation of church and state. And I would say one of the ways you can see that is the Covenanters in Scotland. The king was trying to take authority as the government over the church. And Scripture forbids that. There's two different spheres there, the church and the state. They are distinct, but they are both under God. And what Christians never meant when they gave the world separation of church and state is a separation of God and state, or the separation of morality and state. And separation of church and state is a Christian doctrine, and it was essentially early on in the history of this nation trying to avoid a situation like in England, where you had the Church of England controlled by the state, and they didn't want a state church. And so separation of church and state, that doctrine came from Christians, and it was in terms of trying to avoid a government-controlled state or a state-controlled government. They didn't want something that they have seen gone so bad in history, because it's really a violation of God's law. But again, no Christian believed separation of church and state meant separation of God and state, because Christians have historically always believed that Jesus is a standard of righteousness and justice and morality, and that has something to do with the public square.
Sure. I guess like in the Jeffersonian context and looking at, Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion, etc., or and
as a state church. Yeah.
By the way, this is in this video. You can check this out. I've shared this link with you in the description. The other guy on the phone there is a reporter from, I believe it's the Independent UK. He's based in the United States, but he's for the Independent UK. And this is another one of those interviews resulted from the New Phoenix Times article, slander piece. And so Jeff had to do quite a few of these interviews, and he at this point he decided, let me just go ahead and make sure I document this before any other shenanigans happen here. So that's what he did, and you can see this at the video. I've shared the link in the description with you. And so he had the opportunity to say a lot of interesting things. This guy who was who conducted the interview for the Independent was, well, at least in the interview, was very kind, very willing to let Jeff explain himself, and gave him the opportunity to describe and explain the Christian worldview in great detail. And here's some more of that.
As a state church, that's what they meant. Yeah,
Right.
and there's only one mention of that in Thomas Jefferson's letter to the Baptists who were concerned about the development of a state-controlled church, and that's, when people refer to separation of church and state, that terminology is not in our constitutional documents, but the worldview that gave rise to that perspective was from Christians, and I would say a good thing to look at is the history of the Covenanters, who resisted so strongly the state church situation, and they're really the ones who really gave us this nation. The Huguenots, the Covenanters, the Puritans, and they all had that perspective of separation of church and state is not a separation of God and state. And one of the proofs of that, just as a passing remark, one of the proofs that no one believed in a separation of God and state is our first Supreme Court Justice, John Jay. When he was developing the case law system of our nation, he explicitly referenced the law of God in the case law examples that he was giving us. So the case law system we have in our nation today actually is Christian. It comes from Moses. And John Jay, who was the first Supreme Court Justice, was explicitly quoting the law of God in our initial case law examples. And that was at the founding of our nation. So they didn't hold to the secular perspective of separation of church and state that people hold to today.
There you go. I thought that would be interesting for you. I wanted to share that piece. That's important. And we want to learn as much as we possibly can when we hang out together here on this show. And so, if you run into, you're in a conversation with someone's talking about separation of church and state. All you Christians, you can't take God into the government. Well, sure you can. That's ridiculous. Separation of church and state, not separation of God and state. In fact, God is the one who has given the authority to these leaders. He allows them to have it. Okay, our last piece today, Barbara O'Neill. Health naturopath. Let me give you her background. You might not have heard of her. Barbara O'Neill is an Australian naturopath and lecturer on health issues who in 2019 was banned for life by the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission, the HCCC, from providing free or paid health services. The ban followed an HCC investigation which found that she lacked any health-related qualifications, a degree, diploma, or membership in an accredited health organization. She also wasn't practicing any medicine. Anyway, it also found that she provided dangerous, unsupported, these are lies, dangerous, unsupported health advice to vulnerable groups, meaning people who were not well, right? People who needed help. They call those people vulnerable. This included advising parents to feed their infants raw goat milk or almond milk blended with dates or banana instead of formula. I mean, come on. This is almost a joke, right? And recommending that cancer patients forego chemotherapy in favor of baking soda wraps and dietary changes, which you'll hear from her, she never did. So the point here is that she is a naturopath, nutritionist, health educator, and she's been active at least since 2004. Of course, this article is on Wikipedia also just another hit piece. She says she lacks relevant credentials. What are the relevant credentials to give someone advice when they come to you and ask you? She has rejected the claim that her health advice is not evidence-based, and she has. Anyway, she has that is a true claim. She ran the Misty Mountain Health Retreat near Kempsey, New South Wales, with her husband, charging clients up to $3,000 a week. I don't think she held anyone hostage for treatments and health retreats. She also provided for-fee telephone consultations. According to O'Neill's website, she provided detox services claiming to aid in recovery from heart disease, diabetes, hormonal imbalance, chronic fatigue, candida, fungus, drug addiction, cancer, heartburn, and obesity. You can find her videos on YouTube, and I encourage you to watch them if you're interested in how the body works and how the immune system works. you don't have to be. I can't really say very much on YouTube. I can't. You just can't make comments that go against official narrative today. So let's hear from Barbara herself in an interview recently. Here's the book that her husband wrote recently, and I wasn't even aware that she'd been banned. And I watched her stuff years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe at least, maybe not quite that long, but around 8-10 years ago, I discovered her work, and it was really interesting, and it was useful to me, and there was nothing dangerous about it. It's all very, very common sense approach. And of course, you never hear her say, you should never go to the doctor. You never hear that. You never hear her claim that. She provides you with an alternative if you would choose it. But you can't have that today, right? Facts are irrelevant today. And you're going to see that here even more. This is from the Truth Matters podcast. Now, this is from Amazing Discoveries, Seventh-day Adventist ministry out of Vancouver. I think it'd be from BC, Canada, I believe, and also located in South Africa. So they did an interview with her. She has done a lot of work with Amazing Discoveries, and as far as I'm concerned, the health message they offer is as good as it gets, as far as homeopathic, as far as a natural approach to healing the body, to eating, to life. So I'll give you here a little introduction here from these guys here at Amazing Discoveries and the Truth Matters podcast. This is what really happened. Intimidated and censored. What really happened to Barbara O'Neill. Truth Matters, episode number 6.
Episode of Truth Matters. Please welcome back Barbara O'Neill.
As many might know, in 2018, Barbara came under intense scrutiny by an Australian health authority for advocating a health message that placed the power of the healing in the hands of the individual, and not in the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical companies. This is not to say she's ever spoken against these groups, but rather taught individuals to shape their lifestyles and habits to reduce their need for them altogether. It may be fair to say this is the basis for every health and wellness expert in the world. So what was it that caused Barbara to be the focus of such a level of scrutiny that she decided to leave her home country of Australia? What would we find if we were to review the timeline of Barbara's story and consider all the information? Well, it's time to find out. Barbara, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Matt, and Mackenzie, it's great to be here.
Okay, so there you go. There's Barbara O'Neill. There's the introduction to this. Targeted by Australian health officials, the HCCC. For what? Let's just find out. We gave you her background. She's just someone who runs health retreats that people voluntarily show up to. They're not required to show up. They're not held hostage. Folks, anything that goes against the beast, that is the WHO or the global medical industry, anything, they're so powerful. And you're going to get an example of that today. And we're not going to be talking about vaccines or anything like that. It's implied here, but you'll see what we're talking about. So she gets attacked from a group called Friends of Science. Once again, folks, nature has eaten up grace. There is no truth is not relevant any longer.
Is when things start to get really rocky. It's in 2018 now. Things are running fairly smoothly, but then in October, 2 new characters, so to speak, come onto the scene. And these 2 groups are called Friends of Science and Medicine and Healthcare. It's called Friends in Science and Medicine and Healthcare Complaints Commission. So in 2018, can you give us a little understanding of what happened around that timeline and what the first complaint, the nature of the first complaint that came in, and what made you aware of that this investigation had now started?
That's right. Michael and I were in Bali actually having a holiday, and we got the email, and Michael said, "Oh dear," he said, "there's been some complaints about you." Now let's go back to a month previously. It was one of Michael's gatherings for his political party, public meetings, and they asked if I would give a lecture on the 8 laws of health, which I agreed to. And I basically just spoke on the body's ability to heal itself, and it can heal itself when it's given the right conditions. Michael told me, because I don't really do social media, but he told me that 24 hours later, the Friends of Science came on and said, we have to take this woman down. Are there any volunteers to put in some complaints against this woman? Within a few days, a few complaints came in. Now, the complaints were from a nutritionist in Brisbane. And one complaint was that I was advocating goat's milk for babies if the mother could not breastfeed. The other complaint was that I advocate putting a piece of apple in a net bag for a little baby to suck on so they don't get any lumps. And the claim was that the baby could choke on the net bag. Now, when Michael and I saw these complaints, we laughed. We just said, this is ludicrous. Babies are being fed goat's milk for thousands of years, and especially babies that have allergies to the cow's milk. And you can even buy a little device with a net bag in the pharmacy for mothers to put the apple in. So we didn't take it seriously. Michael seemed to have more concerns than I did. And I was to give an answer. I reflect back now that they wanted their answer to be scientific studies. I didn't give scientific studies. I basically used common sense and history. And I don't think they were happy with my answer, I realise now. And so when I was in Botswana speaking at an educational conference, I got the email that I was officially under investigation. And because I was officially under investigation, I could not speak and I could not give any health advice in Australia while I was under investigation. So the ban really started from there.
All right, so Friends of Science. That's what. Friends of Science. Remember who we've covered it here quite a few times. Edward Bernays, in his book Propaganda, the idea is, you want to change. It used to be called the War Department. Well, let's call it the Defense Department. The people will be more willing to support something called the Defense Department as opposed to something called the War Department, right? Well, let's call our organization the Hunters of Science Heretics Association. Let's call it the Friends of Science organization. See how that works. She had 50,000 signatures. 50,000 signatures she received, and 0 complaints. No one has ever complained. Nothing that's you can find reported has no one's ever complained about her services. And let's listen to that. 50,000 signatures, 0 complaints.
What it is.
Well, and to that end, there was a change.org petition put up for you that received 50,000 signatures in defense of your practices and your teachings and the results that people had from following it. And the number of complaints against you from people you have treated, 0. So can you tell us a little bit about the surprise that you may have had?
That's important. No, complaints from people she had treated, 0. Now, there were complaints, but they were from this board, and they were from, as stated earlier, from people who volunteered to take this woman out. Right? This is not honesty. This is anti-human. It's obviously anti-Christians, anti-human.
When getting this kind of support, 50,000 signatures is not a small feat. What reaction did you get when you submitted, or when whoever put this petition up submitted these 50,000 signatures in relation to 0?
So how did the government respond when they saw 50,000 endorsements and no complaints from anyone who ever took part in her retreats, her health advice? How did the government respond to this? Did they say, "Oh, we're sorry. Obviously, we've made a misstep here"?
0 complaints against.
I was overwhelmed. In fact, the thought of it even makes me a little emotional now. I'm in awe of it. In fact, I almost cannot comprehend it. It is thrilling to see, and it is certainly very, very humbling. And it was June in 2019 that I had to appear at a tribunal, and we were able to present to them then 35,000 signatures, and my understand that to date it's getting up to nearly 55, but it was as if nothing to them, which I thought was also strange.
It was as if nothing. It didn't matter at all. Didn't matter at all what the facts were. Didn't matter at all what the truth was. Nature has eaten up grace. There is no love of truth anymore. Science today is a manipulation. It's not about the search for truth. It's not about the love for knowledge. It's about manipulation. How can we manipulate people to get our way? No evidence. There has been no evidence, and she's still banned for life, even now. Let's get another piece here. Bear with me as I pull this up here.
Health. So I talked about such things. But when it was over, Michael and the lawyer and I were sitting there. And the lawyer said to me, I can't believe this. She said, they've got nothing on you. Now, this is the lawyer who sat through similar tribunals again and again and again. She said, they've got nothing on you. So my husband said, does that mean she'll be free? The ban will be lifted? The lawyer said, oh, no, she'll get a life ban, but she won't be put into jail, because if she was guilty, she'd go to jail. That really challenged us. And so this was June 2019. It must have been July 2019. I was in Fiji at the time teaching at a training school and health retreat. It was on one of the main Fijian islands. And I got the email that I had received a life ban, and they had 17 pages of accusations against me. I cried. In fact, I sobbed. I sobbed for 15 minutes. I was by myself, which I was glad of the luxury of being able to grieve. And after 15 minutes, I stopped. I dried my eyes. And I said, well, Father in heaven, what plan do you have for me now? Because my life is his.
And that's a pretty solid perspective, a pretty solid outlook there. Of course, now, threatened with prison, she has to leave Australia. Why? Because they found something on her? They finally got something that would stick on Barbara O'Neill? Is that what happened? They finally got her, right? No, still no evidence. But they threatened her with prison. Once more, they found nothing on her. They gave her the life ban. They couldn't put her in jail because they had nothing to charge her with, but they still had the authority to ban her for life. But she stayed in Australia. She became the gardener at their retreat, not giving advice, but the gardener, because that's what she was relegated to. But here's this part of the story.
Definitely not.
A recent thing, this happened probably 5 months ago. We'll go back to 2020, where I told you I was the gardener and also training the staff. I was also doing Zooms. I did Zooms to Africa. I did Zoom a couple of different places in Africa. In fact, I did a 21-day seminar on child rearing. I also did Zooms to England, and I did Zooms in a couple of places in the US. So that's 2020. So it must have been February 2021, I received an email from the Healthcare Complaints Commission saying, we notice that you are doing Zooms. This is your final warning. Any more and you will be put in jail for 3 years. I'm not speaking to anyone in Australia, I'm speaking overseas. It was then that my husband said to me, we've got to get you out of Australia. It is not safe. In fact, I had people pleading with me, Barbara, just stop everything. We don't want you to go to jail. I thought jail was for criminals.
Exactly. And that's what we've always thought, that jail is for criminals. But no, today jail is for those who we label as anti-science, for those who we label as anti-vaxxer, those who we label as whatever is expedient for the day to label them so that we can get our ideology forced onto the people. So what is this about ultimately? It's about freedom of choice. That's what it is. And let's see here. We'll share this little piece with you here.
So I think the main thing from all of this is that we need to understand our body and just the freedom to choose what route we want to go. Do we want to try certain natural methods of healing that aid the body in healing itself, or do we want to take conventional route? But we at least need that choice. It's not a free country if we're forced to go a certain way that only benefits a certain group of people.
That's absolutely right. I think, well said, Mackenzie. And this is what my husband's political party is about. It's the Informed Medical Options Party. Notice the word informed, notice the word option. It's really a political party that is fighting for free choice. You see, God's government is a government of choice, and it is our God-given right as human beings to be able to choose. If someone chooses the vaccine, I respect their choice. And what I would like is that same respect back if I choose not to have the vaccine.
That's it. That's what it's about, folks. That's what it comes down to. Freedom of choice. If you choose to take part in this medical procedure, I respect that. I really do. You're acting according to your conscience. As long as you're acting according to your conscience and you haven't been forced into it or not, no one should act against their conscience. That's a sin, according to Scripture. So if you're responding to this according to your conscience, then, feel free. Honestly, that's the right word. Feel free. Don't let anyone control your mind. Don't let anyone take over your ability to choose. We can't allow it. We can't allow it to stand. This has got to stop, as Eric Clapton has said in his new song, which I'll share with you in just a moment. I think I've got up the guts to try to share it with you to play you out today. But just to remind us all today that it's the principle of non-contradiction, making a statement that we can know something about reality, that the truth will not contain contradictory notions or statements. This has been evicted from the public square. Not allowed anymore. Today it's so much more than obvious, beyond obvious at this moment in history, that respectful discourse and debate about science have been overwhelmed by the screeching sounds of a generation that has no perspective beyond its inner desires and unstable emotions. And behind the facade of this raw nerve generation stands the worldview that makes all the madness of lockdowns and mandates and cancel culture and people having to flee their country for claiming that the body has an immune system. That's what makes it all possible. The rejection of absolute truth, the rejection of God. This is the undead corpse of postmodernism, and it's driven by an insatiable hunger for control, scientific dictatorship. And this has brought the world to the brink of societal, economical, and rational collapse. Weak-minded subjectivity, feeding this beast. Worldview matters. It matters a lot. The result of decades of compulsory public education, as informed by arbitrary, corrosive secularism, has made it possible for a global elite to move the masses pretty easily whenever they'd like to. We find ourselves today, as a group, spineless pushovers. Now, individuals, here are some individuals we've seen who are not spineless, who are standing up for humanity. But as a group, we are under judgment. And these symptoms are also seen in the modern church, as I shared with you earlier. Canadian pastor Jacob Raume said recently how easy it would have been for Nero if he would have just thought. He could have shut down the early Christian church if he would have just thought to tell everyone that there's a pandemic. You can't go to church, you have to stay home, right? Would that have worked on the early Christians? No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't have. And that's the problem. That's the way a lot of Christians are thinking about it today. We need to do what the government tells us to do. We have Romans 13, we're to obey the authorities. Sure you are. Until they ask you to sin. Until they compel you to act against your conscience. We respect these authorities when they fulfill the authority that God has given them to fulfill. But when they step outside of that, no, that's when we resist. Along with compulsory public education, the media seems to be another very effective weapon of mind control and just basic deception. At this point, it's even difficult to tell the difference between corporate shills, disinformation agents, and who might be a true believer in the modern movement of media masochism. There aren't very many narratives right now. Possibly there's only two. And those are who's for us, who's against us, with absolutely no middle ground. Black and white thinking. In America, we've been subjected to a decades-long process of demoralization that has led to the current destabilization. And now we've been introduced with a crisis, the step that would follow, normalization. Doesn't have to be that way. Let's pray for the world. We do see pushback coming. Worldview matters. We need to talk about it. We need to challenge people on what the worldview is. That's why I shared that long piece at the beginning about what is the Reformation brought us. It brought us back to a worldview that's true, can be shown to be true. Gave us a foundation in biblical truth, which is where absolute truth is found. The current prevailing worldview of human autonomy, man as sovereign, government is absolute in its authority, to reclaim a term that's been co-opted by the agents of Agenda 21. This is not sustainable. Not if freedom is still important to anyone out there. And today we've looked at some examples of how contradictory, misguided, and vicious the media and the government. Us. It's not like that's some thing out there. The media and the government, it's just us. It's just other people. We're doing it to ourselves. We can't blame the elite. We're playing along with it. We have control if we choose to exert it. There's more of us by a long shot. What will we do? What will we do? What will happen? God bless you, my friends.